Is your factory installed jack sufficient for your trailer and the load? Do you ever dolly your trailer down, loaded or always unloaded? That's what we're going to get into today. We're going to upgrade a jack on this trailer. Needs a little heavier unit on there, so stick with us and let's see if we can get this thing replaced. Well, thank y'all for tuning in. It is early. It is about 5:15 in the morning. We are trying to beat the heat today. The humidity is about 193% already. It's about 80 outside. It is going to be a swampy one if you know what I'm talking about. We have a trailer here that gets dollied down loaded most of the time. I will say most of your utility trailers, when you dolly them down, they are going to be dollied down unloaded, so your jack may be fine. We have two things going on with this jack. It is worn out. It is original to the trailer. The upper bearing or bushing, whatever it may have in there, is worn completely out. It slips and it's just hard to jack for the customer. This is an 8,000 pound static jack. Even though this trailer is rated for 14,000 pounds, you have an 8,000 pound jack. That doesn't necessarily mean it's undersized, just like if you were to have a 16-foot trailer with two 3,500 pound axles on it, you're likely going to have a jack with a 2,500 pound capacity on it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's undersized, because when you go to dolly it down, you're just handling the tongue weight basically on the trailer. The axles are supporting some of the weight. So just because the number on the jack is way lower than the GVWR on the trailer does not necessarily mean it's undersized, but it can be if you're ever dollying down with your load. If you leave your load on your trailer, whether that be your side-by-side, your tractor, material, whatever it is, leave me a comment below. I'd like to see how many of you do that. If that's something you do, you may want to upgrade your jack either to a larger single, or in an application like this trailer, you could put dual jacks to stabilize both corners of it. That would be an option. Per our customer's request, we're just going to go to a larger jack. We're going to upgrade to a 12,000 pound static Bulldog with a 2-speed option, just to make it a little easier to dolly up and down. It will take you more cranks to get it up and down, but the resistance you're going to have to be messing with is going to be easier due to that 2-speed. So there's a couple ways to get this off. There's actually 3 or 4 ways to get it off. You can use a plasma cutter. We are not going to do that this morning. Most people do not have a plasma. We're going to use the torch method, or you could use a grinder. The thing you have to keep in mind is when cutting your jack off of the trailer, you want to sacrifice the material on the jack and not the structure or the frame of the trailer in there, so you don't compromise integrity of any of that. So I'm going to grab a torch. We're going to make some flame and make some sparks fly, so stick with us and let's get going. Before you get your torch or grinder out and go to cutting and whittling on whatever project you are, the first thing you need to do is make sure you got the proper PPE. You're going to need some safety glasses. You're going to need a face shield, tinted and or maybe clear. Need some decent leather gloves. I would not recommend cotton gloves. Those things will catch on fire, like a candle wick. Maybe a long sleeve shirt, whether it's FR or just a good starch cotton like this one is. Boots, earplugs, anything to keep you from getting burnt, your ears hurt, your eyes hurt. Sometimes even when you go through all those steps with the proper PPE, you still have an issue. I made my first trip to the eye doctor earlier this week with a little piece of metal in my eye. It does happen, and yes, I was wearing my PPE. It come from underneath and went up and got an eye. It was easy to get out, so it wasn't a straight projectile. It just went and bounced off my cheek. It happens to all of us, but do the best you can. So once you've got all your proper PPE before you go to cutting and whittling, make sure you've got any wiring, any hydraulic lines, anything that you don't want to cut, make sure you get it out of the way. The last thing I will say before we cut this, when you're cutting a jack, these will have some grease in them. Most people don't grease these on a regular basis like their Easy Lube axles. They grease them every 4 or 5 years, whether they need to or not. But there will still be some residual grease in here, just like in an Easy Lube, even though nobody's put any grease in it anytime recently, and that will catch on fire. So when using a torch or a plasma, you could have some flame up. Even though you're cutting here, you may have flame up come out of the top. This will act as a chimney, so don't stick your face over that. Just make sure you're back and make sure you're paying attention. Maybe a good idea to keep you a fire extinguisher around. We have them placed on every corner of the shop in strategic locations just for that reason. So that's enough rattling. We've got our PPE, we've got all of our stuff moved out of the way. We're gonna go to cutting this jack, get it off and get the new one on for the customer. Just a quick tip, before you start making your cut, take the torch and burn any paint away from the cut area. That will just make your cut cleaner and help to not stop your tip up. If the trailer is powder coated, you can use the same method, but beware, as burning away powder coat, it has a tendency to turn back to more of a liquid form and can drip on you or splatter and can cause burn. So make sure you are wearing your PPE. You can also, after burning it, you can take a wire brush to clean that area up, and that will just give you a little nicer cut. As you see here, as we're making our cut, we're focusing to keep all the cut to sacrifice the jack and not the structure on the tongue. We really don't want to cut into that. We're going to leave a little bit of weld on the structure. We only want to wash that weld off with a torch, not really to cut it. Then once the jack is removed, you will see how we clean that up to prepare it for the new jack install.
Now we get the big hammer. So now we'll come in and clean all that up, get it prepped for the new jack, and get it installed, and we'll be ready to roll.
One thing you can do before you start the grind is, after the cut cools off a little bit so you don't have any red hot slag, is to take a chipping hammer, a chisel, or a file and get any loose debris and slag off. That will keep it from flying all over you as you're grinding. We're going to use a coarse grinding disc to take the majority of the existing weld and any leftover material from the sacrificed jack. Even though it may be tempting to grind all the material off, do not overgrind the area. I like to leave just a little bit of the existing weld on there with the coarse grinding disc, and I will take the remainder of that off here shortly. Now that the majority of our material has been removed with a coarse grinding disc, we're going to switch to a 40 grit flat disc. You can use a 36 if you would like, to finish off the cleanup of the weld and any extra material that was left. We don't want to overgrind it and to affect the integrity of the material in any way. And at this time, we will also use the flat disc to clean off any paint that's going to be around our weld area, any soot buildup, any spatter that we may have, and get ready to install the jack. Now we're going to take the same flap disc that we used to finish up the tongue. We're going to remove any paint in our weld area on the jack. We have taken some measurements so we know right where to grind to take any paint or powder coat that it may have that may interfere with the weld. So take that off, and we're almost ready for the install.
Now that we got both surfaces cleaned up, prepped, we're going to install the jack, get it squared up, and weld it on, and we'll be good to go.
We're going to get the jack situated to the desired height that we want, so we make sure that it is not hanging down too low, and we want to make sure that it's not too high to interfere with the drop leg portion of it. So once we get that adjusted properly, we'll be ready to tack and to move forward with our weld. Now that we have both surfaces prepped and ready to weld, we are going to make two marks. We're going to make a center mark
on the tongue, and then we're also going to take a measurement on the jack and make a center mark there, and we will line those two center marks up so the jack is perfectly centered. We will make our tack, and then we will make our square adjustment from there. Now that our tack is in place, we will use our foot or anything else we have to manipulate the jack to get it square. We're using a large speed square here. Framing square will work just fine, or a smaller speed square will be sufficient. As far as the front to back, it is just going to be clamped to the front of the trailer to keep it square that direction, and then just double check your left to right measurements to make sure that it is true up and down, and we're almost ready to weld. Here we have everything square. It is clamped in place. It is tacked. It's not going anywhere. Make sure that your welder is set to the proper settings for the material that you'll be welding. If you do not have a MIG or wire feed welder, don't worry. If you have a arc or stick welder, that will work just fine. Just make sure your area is clean, you have a good ground, and you are ready to pull the trigger. As you notice, I started welding on the left-hand side. My clamp is on the right-hand side. Be sure to keep it clamped. If you make a full weld on the left-hand side, it will likely draw and you will have a gap. That's why I'm welding the clamp side last, and then we will weld top and bottom so that we do not have any draw, any warping, and our jack stays true and in its original location of the tack.
We're going to temporarily install the handle so we can mock up the hanger for the handle once we get that welded on. And we'll be getting close to being done. Now we'll just wait for the paint to dry. Once the handle is dry, we'll reinstall it. One thing I like to do once the paint is dry, if you'll come into your greaser, just take a small pick, or you can actually take the edge of a razor blade, whatever you got. Just clean the paint out of the zerk so it will take grease a little easier. We'll reroute our wiring, and then this will be ready to go back in to the field for service. Remember, when you click the subscribe, leave us a thumbs up. Also leave us a comment down below. Video ideas, keep the comments coming. We really enjoy those. We'll leave some links to this jack in the description below if you're looking for a Bulldog or something comparable to that, to the handle, and maybe anything else we use in the video. While you're commenting, let me know what type of flap disc you prefer. I've went through a couple different brands here lately, and some of them I am not real happy with. So if you're a flap disc guy or even grinding disc, leave those comments below. I'd like to get your feedback on that. And we will see you on the next one.